There are certain places that dot our great blue world that hold a presence of unnerving otherworldliness that keeps most of the human population at bay. The Sargasso Sea in the Atlantic, the suicide forests at the base of Mount Fuji, and the mysterious pine barrens of New Jersey State are but a few examples. These places exude an enigmatic and off-putting kind of aura that triggers a response in the human brain that intrinsically tells us to stay far, far away from their sphere of influence. Stories of weird and wild encounters, mysterious disappearances, and even deaths attributed to the paranormal that stoke our sense of trepidation and danger. The Michigan Triangle in the middle of the lake and bordering the state that shares its name is one of these places. A string of bizarre and frightening occurrences make up a rich tapestry of eerie folklore that has earned this spot as one of the most active spots on Earth when it comes to tales of the mysterious and the strange. But none exemplifies this notion than the story of a young man who set off on the lake one day and was sucked into an enigma that defies explanation to this very day. We bring you the unexplained disappearance of Steven Kubacki. Growing up in the quaint hills of South Deerfield, Massachusetts, young Steven always had an eye for problem solving. His formidable intellect was undeniable, and his studious nature earned him a scholarship to the prestigious Deerfield Academy. Here he excelled at not only academics, but athletics as well, being an avid skier and mountain climber. After his time at the academy, Steven decided to further his education at Hope College on the shores of Lake Michigan. Here he continued to shine academically, earning a reputation as an intense and extraordinarily bright student. Steven wouldn't abandon his athletics, however, and relished any chance he could get hiking in the hills and trails around Lake Michigan. During the winter, it was even rumored that the young man would venture out onto the frozen lake, testing its sturdiness as well as his own resolve. During a stint of study near Germany, Steven engaged in a relationship with a German woman and in the process discovered another hidden passion of his, namely the joys of writing. Steven would pursue his journalistic endeavors with rigor, so much so that he landed a job with a Holland Sentinel newspaper upon his graduation. During the bitterly cold winter of 1978, Holland, Michigan was slammed with an intense blizzard that dumped over a foot of snow onto the area. Now, the storm was so bad that residents were still digging themselves out weeks after the blizzard had hit. The date of February 18, 1978, would prove a fateful day for Steven. He set out on a cross-country skiing trip as he normally did during the winter months. Steven bid farewell to his two roommates and set off for a day of skiing. Steven Kubacki would not be seen or heard from for the next 15 months. 2 days after Steven disappeared, a group of snowmobile enthusiasts stumbled upon a strange sight. Out on the ice of Lake Michigan, they found a pair of skis and a backpack, seemingly abandoned. A set of tracks led methodically away from the skis and backpack, but abruptly stopped some 200 yards away from the scene, almost as if the person who had left them vanished mid-stride. The scene was so unsettling that the enthusiasts immediately contacted police to report the strange discovery. Authorities linked the backpack to Steven Kubacki and learned that a missing persons report had already been filed by Steven's roommates after he had failed to return from his skiing trip 2 days prior. Investigators mounted a full-scale search effort for the missing skier, and many theorized that Steven most likely fell through the ice and possibly drowned due to strong undercurrents beneath the lake. However, they admitted that there was scant evidence supporting this theory, as there were no signs of a breakthrough in the lake anywhere surrounding the abandoned skis and backpack. It was almost as if Steven had left his equipment, wandered some 200 yards away, and simply evaporated into thin air. Steven's father and brother, John and John Jr. respectively, flew out to Michigan to help search for their missing loved one. John Jr. even commented that Steven would have never left his backpack behind willingly, and that this action was extremely out of character. Sadly, 3 days into the search, nothing had been found, and the efforts were suspended until the spring-thaw of 1978. When this was launched again, these search efforts yielded no results, and in a last-ditch effort, Holland police sent Steven's dental records to Chicago, surmising that there was a chance the missing man might have been a victim of the then-notorious serial killer, John Wayne Gacy. However, this avenue, again, came up empty. Refusing to give up, Steven's family was convinced that foul play was involved, and they urged police to investigate this avenue further. This was met with a stony response, and authorities at this point were convinced that Steven was the victim of a tragic drowning accident. On the outskirts of the town of Pittsfield, Massachusetts, a motorist stops by the side of the road. A man wearing a coat and shouldering a backpack flags him down. This man seems disoriented and asks the driver what town he's in. Now the motorist figures the man must be hungover or on some kind of a substance and tells him that he's in the town of Pittsfield. Catching a lift with a motorist, the odd man relays that he doesn't remember very much. He says he woke up in a large field some 4 miles up the road. He tells the driver that the clothes he's wearing, as well as the backpack he's carrying, aren't his, and he has no memory of ever owning them. Back in the town of Pittsfield, the motorist buys himself and his odd passenger a cup of coffee, as well as that day's newspaper. When the hitchhiker reads the date on the front page, he is suddenly hit with a wave of repressed memories. According to him, his name is Steven Kubacki, and he has no recollection of where he's been for the past 15 months. Steven fears what the shock of the news might do to his immediate family, so he decides to head to his aunt's house in Great Barrington, Massachusetts. After a time, he reaches her house and timidly knocks on the front door. Now, Steven's aunt was visiting her next-door neighbor at this time, but did notice the odd man who was lumbering up to her doorstep. When the stranger stepped into the light of a street lamp, she immediately recognized the man as her missing nephew, Steven. She ran to greet him, tears in her eyes, and the two embraced. A short while later, she calls Steven's father to let him know that his son is indeed alive and safe. A day later, the young man was joyously reunited with his family amidst the media circus. Everyone wanted to know exactly what happened to the missing skier that had suddenly reappeared out of nowhere. Steven's family, at least for the moment, cared very little about the details surrounding his disappearance. They were just overjoyed to have him back. Various psychiatrists had a field day with the case, many devoting themselves to figuring out what could cause such a complete lapse in memory. Others studying the case were convinced that there was no mystery to solve at all. They contended that Steven Kubacki faked the entire ordeal and orchestrated his own vanishing for attention of some kind, or even as a publicity stunt. Steven himself explained that media attention was relentless, with more and more people doubting his story. The pressures eventually drove Steven into a deep isolation for many years afterward, until the story finally died down. The strange disappearance and sudden re-emergence of Steven Kubacki passed into folklore and urban legend.
I was lying on the grass in a meadow when I woke up that Saturday morning in May. I didn't even know where I was or where I had been. I was wearing clothes that weren't even mine. I started going through a pack that I assumed was mine, and I found some maps. I would guess that I was hitchhiking. I didn't really know. I didn't know what the date was until I got a lift into town, and I read the front page of a newspaper. At the time, I had vague feelings, and I had some running shoes. I felt like I did a lot of running. I was also wearing a marathon t-shirt from Wisconsin, but I have no idea how I even got it. Now, I was initially confused by all the hugging and kissing because I felt like I hadn't really been gone that long. But I guess eventually I did start to understand. I'm amazed by all the money spent looking for me and about graduating. I really don't know what I'll do now. I've got a lot to think about, you know? I'm going to try and find out where I was and what I was up to. It's a relief to find out that my family never believed that I was dead. I'm just glad to be home.
Steven also put forward his own theory as to what might have happened. He stated that hikers often suffer from a loss of heat and succumb to exhaustion in cold hiking temperatures. They enter an altered state of consciousness many mental health experts refer to as a fugue state. As fascinating as this theory might be, it doesn't come close to explaining how Steven survived over a year out on the harsh Michigan terrain, having no memory of where he was or what he had been doing. The only thing Steven could recall about his last moments on the ice were him inexplicably leaving his skis and backpack behind and simply walking farther out onto the frozen lake. Steven said he felt almost compelled to trek deeper and farther than he ever had before. The next thing he knew, he woke up in that sparse meadow in Pittsfield, 15 months later, and over 700 miles away from where he disappeared. The aftermath of Steven's disappearance would lead some investigators down some twisting rabbit holes that were as mysterious as the vanishing itself. One investigative journalist in particular, a woman named Ellen Killeran, uncovered a bizarre set of incidents involving some of Steven's friends leading up to the February 18th disappearance. Steven's mother had reported that a family friend had been receiving strange phone calls relating to someone inquiring about Steven. Whoever was making the calls was telling the family to contact Steven at a particular unknown number. When this friend contacted the number, she found that it had been disconnected. When presented with the specific number, his mother confirmed that she had indeed received a few phone calls from Steven from that very same number. Now, police tried to trace down the number to find out who was making the mysterious calls. The name of a female student at Hope College was tracked down, and it was indicated that she might be the mysterious caller. In the days after Steven disappeared, this female student was reported as acting erratically and had made comments that people weren't looking in the right places for Steven. When police tried to question this woman further, she herself mysteriously vanished. When Steven was making his way into Great Barrington to find his aunt, the man he had supposedly got a ride from was tracked down. His name was Ronald Curtis, a 28-year-old student who had his own bizarre story to tell about his ride with Steven into Great Barrington. He said that Steven made no mention of waking up in a meadow and instead told Curtis that his name was Nathaniel. This Nathaniel said that he had hitched a ride into San Francisco more than a year before and had just recently flown back to Massachusetts. Curtis said that the man calling himself Nathaniel quoted accurate bus fare for the time and was even surprised that milkshakes were so much cheaper on the East Coast than they had been in California. Nathaniel went on to say that he had been traveling in California to learn from a new Eastern transcendental religion that he was now studying. Curtis didn't want to make outright accusations, but heavily implied that he believed Steven to be lying about his disappearance, and that a weird Eastern cult might be behind Steven Kubacki's vanishing. Steven himself was later questioned about Curtis's account, but simply stated that he didn't remember anything about the alleged conversation. Today, Steven Kubacki is 69 years old and works in the psychiatric field. He runs his own website that is dedicated to his transcendental philosophy and generally does not talk about his 15-month disappearance back in 1978. However, this in and of itself bolsters the theory that his vanishing was engineered by Steven himself as some kind of bizarre pilgrimage in order to study this particular Eastern philosophy. Interestingly enough, Steven refuses to confirm or deny any of these allegations. The YouTuber The Missing Enigma has done a personal sit-down interview with Mr. Kubacki on his Patreon. I'll leave a link down below, should you want to search it out for yourself. So in the end, we're left with an enduring mystery. What exactly happened to Steven Kubacki on that cold February day back in 1978? Did he encounter a bizarre phenomenon of time and space that warped him into some pocket dimension that caused him to vanish for over a year and somehow re-emerge 700 miles away with no memory of where he had been? Or did Steven engineer his own disappearance in order to study some mysterious Eastern religion, possibly involving a cult of some kind? Well, we may never get the true answers in this case, as Steven himself refuses to confirm or deny accusations and allegations in any direction. But there is one thing that Steven can attest to in his odd journey. He decided to test the power of the mysterious Michigan Triangle and remains one of the very few to escape its clutches and tell the tale. He will confirm nor deny very little in his story, but the one thing he can say is that he now questions everything and trusts no one. Until next time.